Welcome to the first lecture of the Visiting Artist Series this fall. This series is a collaboration between the Cleve Carney Museum of Art, the Fine Arts, Architecture, Photography, and Interior Design programs. And we hope you can also attend our next lecture with Grace Lee Lawrence on November 7th from 1 to 2 p.m. So just keep that on your radar. That will be next door in the Belushi Auditorium. But today, it is my great pleasure to welcome Millicent Kennedy to speak with us. Millicent's practice is interested in how we archive a physical world in flux through skills both laborious and ancient, including book and box making, natural dye, and hand stitching. Kennedy connects to the knowledge of generations of unknown hands who work to hold their world together. Their work as a whole is interested in connecting two or more things that could come separate or run away from one another. Like dyeing and mending and the alchemy is the labor and the material itself that leads to transformation. They received a bachelor's degree from Northeastern Illinois University and an MFA from Northern Illinois University, where they were awarded the Helen Merritt Fellowship. Please help me welcome Millicent.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Millicent Kennedy. I want to thank you for being here, but also for allowing me to kind of like talk to you about my practice today, too. I personally find that every time that I do one of these presentations talking about my work, I learn a lot more about my work than I knew before. So really appreciate it. So we'll start with a little bit of background information about me. So I've been in Chicago since 2009. I moved here from Mississippi, so that is where I grew up. In high school, I'd attended an early college program at SAIC, really loved Chicago, and, desperately wanted to get out on my own. I spent a lot of time getting my bachelor's degree because I did want to figure out how to be able to afford to live here and support myself. And so I ended up, working full time through undergrad and grad school. And I did my bachelor's at Northeastern and my MFA at Northern, mostly focusing in printmaking and fiber arts. You'll see definitely both of those represented in the work that we look at today. And you'll also see found objects. I'm definitely someone that's very invested in materials, the history of materials that we work with as artists, as well as, how the things that we own shape our lives. So all of those things are kind of important to me. This first work is kind of trying to show you a little bit of an ancestry, right? So this is the first time that I, as a young artist, quilted an object into fabric, and this is from around 2010. So I had a class in textiles where we were learning a variety of different things. One of the things that we were doing was quilting. And the instructor offhand mentioned that instead of having batting inside of your fabric, you could also sew an object into it. And I was immediately taken by that idea and really wanted to think about, what does it mean to hold something with many stitches? What does it mean to kind of create something into a fossil? And so you can see in this one, there's a rosary that's hand sewn into fabric, and it's quite small, as you'd imagine, rosary size. I continued on with this kind of metaphor that's embodied, right? So it is, engaging with a literal material, but then what do the materials chosen kind of tell us? And how can it kind of engage with space sculpturally? So what you're seeing with this piece is a quilt. It's a twin size quilt that I have sewn rocks from the river next to where I grew up into it. And the weight of the physical blanket matches my body weight. And I have always kind of had some sleeping problems in general. I've sleptwalked since I was a kid, which, I don't think at the time I necessarily thought of those kinds of things as something that was part of this. I think I was thinking of it more as a weight of anxiety and restlessness. But it definitely, the more I reflect on it, that definitely feels like it's part of the work as well. And this is it installed at a show that was in 2020, February 2020. So like right before a lot of things changed. And there's also on the wall behind it, you can see a vinyl silhouette that's kind of implying a person being there as well. I also was working with a lot of broken things, broken ceramics, broken glasses, thinking about how we can take something that has been destroyed, something shattered, and suspend it in this moment. With these, I'm also doing a little bit of working with dyes for my textiles, kind of like reclaiming some more of the parts of that. And they're also, kind of reminiscent of gardens where the sand or soil has been moved around an object. It's kind of like a meditation on the space and how, space shifts. So that's kind of one of the modalities of my work, right? I sew things into fabric, and it's definitely something that I come back to again and again. But we'll also talk about some of my other kind of methods of art making. I also, since 2009, have, whenever I cut my hair, like I'll, kind of grow it out, make a big cut, and then sew that hair into these abstractions that, can be kind of reminiscent of a tree stump, or, maybe it's something more like tissue and muscular, based. I also started to get donations from my friends. So it's not just my hair that you're seeing here. There's quite a few people that have donated it. And for me, this is a lot about time passing. How do we, kind of like look back on a certain period of time? There's so much about our body that is connected to time. It kind of gives us space for something that would generally be discarded. There's a detail of one of those as well. You can probably get the sense that I'm very interested in, like, how do we hold something? How do we take care of it? What does it mean to do that? But I'm also interested in when that doesn't work, when our experience is very ephemeral, something that gets lost or damaged, and kind of thinking about those marks with some reverence too. So with this work, I've carved into the rolling pins, so bringing back like some of my printmaking history, like treating it as if it were a woodcut, but in a circle. And I carved images of my hands, my father's hands, and my grandmother's hands. And then the way that they're printed is by pressing them into flour, or in this case, it's with sugar. And part of that being, kind of interested in how things get passed down, be that something that is very like in the domestic sphere of cooking. So maybe, it's knowledge, maybe some of it's trauma, kind of all of those things. But they're simultaneously very, very fragile, right? Like I've never had these in a show where someone didn't, put their finger into the sugar or try and sit a drink down into them. And then it kind of becomes part of the work. So those kind of marks are part of it as well. This is a still from a video. You can see the video on my website if you'd like to. I have another still of it that'll kind of give you a sense of what's going on. But this is a performance that I did for camera. So, this was, let's see, December 2020, kind of like deep lockdown time, right? And I was thinking a lot about dancing and how that kind of like casual contact with another person for this like brief choreographed moment doesn't happen, right? And I was specifically thinking about a song that myself and my father waltzed to at one point. So I wanted to make a drawing that was this dance. And so thinking about how I could do that, I sifted a layer of flour onto the floor at this gallery that let me kind of do what I wanted with it for the month. And then I waltzed to that song over and over again until what I end up with, oh, I guess it does have the video, great. Until I end up being able to see a drawing from it. So, you know, it's a chaotic drawing, and it's about something happening. It's not necessarily something that you look at on its own and are greatly, you know, inspired by the rendering of. It's more about how did it come into existence in this world. At that same studio space, it's an old funeral home is what it is. So I had a studio in the basement of this gallery space. My studio was the embalming room at one point in time. Definitely affected the work, right? So I bring that up to mention that like the space where you're making things can really affect kind of like the outlook that you have on what you're producing. It gives a lot of context. And I think that we all, you know, should think about that in how we're making, what in communities we engage with. And at this time, I was also reading a lot. I was reading Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which is a very progressive era book that follows the story of a particular family. But the part that people kind of like mostly know about it is that it starts in the meatpacking industry in Chicago. The main protagonist actually ends up working at quite a few different jobs throughout the course of it, but it very much is, you know, kind of a struggle of survival story. And I knew a lot about The Jungle before reading it because my father, who's a veterinarian, in his private practice, it closed. So he started working for the government at chicken processing plants, which is apparently a job that's protected by law for veterinarians, because they have to be able to identify diseases and stuff. And that is something that came directly from The Jungle being published and people being really disgusted. So I say all of that and tell you that I was like working in a previously like embalming room to give a little context to kind of like a big visual shift in this next piece that I'm showing you. So this is a work that I kind of made directly influenced by The Jungle and thinking about a bread basket or like a tablecloth and a welcoming place. This goal of having a place to rest your head and to, you know, break bread with friends. I wanted to make something that was full of the hand labor of stitching, but also fulfilled like no kind of like basic human needs, right? Like there's not bread in the bowl. And you can see that there's also casts of fingers that are part of this, which is kind of like directly related to the book as well. From here, I'm going to talk to you about a different series of work that was very influenced by, you know, a period of time where I was working at a job where there were a lot of just like broken materials that were sitting around, and it kind of shifted how I was working with these objects sewn into fabric. Previously, you know, we saw the ceramic objects, which are pretty directly, you know, broken, suspended in time things. These were not this broken, right? Like they're something that I had to dismantle, but they were something that wasn't functioning. So I was thinking a lot about how we have manufactured so many things to exist in the world, and a lot of them break and are not really made to be repaired. And it's just a lot of that designed obsolescence, right? Like really the goal is increasing consumption. So these are things that have been broken. There's not a plan for fixing them, and I'm kind of turning them into these fossilized remains. So in this one, the blue one that you're seeing is a pencil sharpener, and the kind of more coral pink one is a digital camera. Someone also gave me a landline phone, which is, you can imagine, is not something that necessarily gets so much use anymore. I think there was also like one phone number written in the contacts list of it. And I love those kind of small moments where there's just like, what if we called that person? And this is another piece from that same series. This is a keyboard. So you can imagine this one gets quite large. It's a lot bigger. And the larger, like the dismantled thing, like the more parts that there are, it kind of takes up space in a different way. So, this one is 54 by 54 inches. It's kind of hard to get a sense of the scale on a screen, right? And this is an adding machine specifically. So not a calculator, like one of the ones that has like a reel of paper that would type things out. And I believe the ribbon is in here as well too. So one of the things that happens when you start making art out of, trash is people start giving you things. And so a lot of this stuff was donated to me. Someone was like, I have this thing that's broken. Do you want it? And I almost always say yes, because I'm really interested in like the assignment of responding to a thing, like how can I think about this? And it like kind of changes how I make my work. Similarly, we have a calculator here, it's also something that we don't really use as much because we all have a calculator on our phone. Like, why have this single-use object? Again, people will give you a lot of trash if you say that you want to make art out of trash. And every artist that I have met has a broken box fan from their studio that has just been left on overnight for too many nights in a row. It's burnt out. It's cheaper to buy a new one than to try and fix it. And so I've been gifted a lot of fans as a consequence. And I really thought that was kind of a beautiful parallel to workers. Workers are, overused, forgotten about, and eventually burn out and are maybe replaceable to the place that they're being, that their labor is being traded. Some more of the fans. And if it's not obvious, all of this is hand sewing that is holding these things into fabric. We have a detail that's coming up that can maybe give you like a little bit of a sense of that more. This is a fan that's been kind of like more exploded, more of all of the parts taking up space. And then it's sewn into fabric, as you can see here, and then mounted. And it's not necessarily that I, willfully don't want to use a sewing machine or that I want to make like more labor for myself. A lot of this would not be possible to do with a machine in any real practical way. But I am very interested in that labor, as you can probably tell from some of the things that I've talked about so far. What does it mean to spend the time with something? What does it mean to kind of consider these materials? And again, circling back to like where we are influences the work. I'm going to show you a few images from a residency that I did at Lil Street Art Center in Chicago. This was from 2022 to 2023. And I was a resident in the textiles department. And I have a background in printmaking and textiles, and I knew that I wanted to, kind of work on printing with dye. And I kind of got into this longer exploration of screen printing with natural dyes because I wanted to kind of like further consider the source of the materials that I'm using. So here you're seeing me with some fabric that I've printed, as well as my studio. And these are some various kind of like moments from that residency. I had a photographer that reached out for like doing headshots, which was terribly awkward of an experience in general for me because I'm awkward, but it was kind of fun. And then you'll also see some screen printed textiles as well as some ceramics that have been printed on, all things that I made at that point in time. I also, while I was doing the residency at Lil Street, was working on this project that's for a Milwaukee house museum. And, you know, having the larger studio space at Lil Street really did help me to kind of think about this. And what you're seeing in this piece is all porcelain ceramics that are holding various tools or materials that would have been things used by people that worked for the family whose house museum we're in. So the idea being that the labor of these people is kind of what is feeding this beautiful, opulent house. And, you know, that being sewn into fabric again as this fossilizing moment of it. You'll notice like that the surface of the plates and bowls looks pretty flat. That's the fabric stretched across it. But people thought that it was like something poured into it, which I thought was pretty interesting. I was also working towards a 2-person show around this time, and I knew that I wanted to do something with labor, and specifically thinking about labor as it relates to garment workers, right? So someone had given me this broken sewing machine. I knew that I wanted to work with it, and I kind of went forward with researching the history of sewing machines, which if you have never seen the video for The Secret Life of a Sewing Machine, you should absolutely check it out. They do a life-size version of what a sewing machine is doing with people. It's great. But in my research, one of the things that I learned was that tailors were very adverse to the idea of the sewing machine, right? It's going to affect their business. They don't want it around. The first fully sewing machine operated factory was in France, and a group of tailors got together and burned it down with the owner inside the building. He did make it out, so he was okay. But it's you know, an interesting example of the tension that's kind of like always been part of textiles. It is historically labor that's been undervalued, and you know that still continues to this day. We still see that again and again. So I was interested in taking apart this sewing machine, sewing it into fabric that I have printed and then quilted together, and showing those in this different way that is kind of sculptural, kind of a quilt, and all of the broken pieces. So here's another installation view, and then we also have a few of little details from those. And when people look at it, they're frequently like, how is that one sewing machine? I don't understand. That looks like 3 sewing machines. There's just a lot of parts to them, truthfully. This work, I was also interested in it going into people's homes. So instead of trying to sell the whole thing, which would probably not happen, right? It would be very difficult to do, and for someone to have installed, you know, it's fairly large. I was selling them individually to people. So each time that it got shown, it would get a little bit smaller. So here's that same installation in kind of 2 different places through time, once in North Carolina and once in Nashville. And by the time it's in Nashville, it's pretty small. I also am an educator, and I'm really interested in kind of sharing things that I've learned in my practice for working with natural dyes. So this is at a indigo workshop at Nashville that was alongside that same show, where we used clay as a resist and then dyed all of our materials in the same indigo vat. And there's also something very beautiful about the way that you use natural dye if you are kind of making it a communal process, right? something that, can kind of be touched by many. All right, so we're going to look at a few more works from the same show as the sewing machine. The title of the sewing machine, I should also mention, is We Have Hands and So We Work, which is directly taken from a documentary about sweatshop workers. These were made for that same show, also dye printed on fabric. And these were across from one another in the gallery space. And people started to call them mirrors. And I was really interested in that because sure, they're ovals, right? And we kind of associate an oval frame with a mirror, but there's nothing really truly mirror-like about it so much. So I was interested in that idea and how this specific shape, this oval shape, allows us to imagine something as something that reflects. Maybe they're mirrors, and maybe they're also portraits of a place and time. And here's, kind of like a demonstration of like what the process is of making one of these. There is fabric that is below and that wraps around the frame. And then there's objects that are in the middle and another piece of fabric on top. All of those things are pinned and then sewn by hand to hold everything together. And I got pretty into this idea of these portraits with materials. So the next show that I did was all of these kind of oval pieces. A lot of them with materials from the residency that I was doing at the time. With the exclusion of this object, these are actual fossils that are sewn into fabric. These are megalodon teeth and a few corals as well. You can see like the printing kind of coming more and more into the textiles and influencing how that composition kind of changes. And here's megalodon tooth that I kept out of the fabric because I just loved it as an object. It fits so nice in your hand. It's just like one of those satisfying things. And a collaborator that I was working on a show with gave me these. So they also, again, donated material. This one specifically has objects that are from the residency at Lil Street and that are from the screen printing kind of area. These are edges of screen printing squeegees that have been trimmed down so that they're a little bit smaller. And there's also a cord for plugging in your phone to play music that's been sewn into the fabric. And these kind of very much felt like a portrait of the place, like you're in the studio, you're working late, listening to your music and such. And another thing about all of this kind of like handwork is that it is pretty mobile. So I personally on my phone have a lot of pictures like this where I'm hanging out at home and working on something, and I have a little assistant that comes in and helps me out too. So, it's just fun. So let's look a little bit more at the natural dye process. I'm not going to get too into the science of it, but I will kind of show you a little bit of like things in process and talk about them a little bit if you're curious. So this is me at Acre Residency this past summer. I spent most of 2 weeks printing and dyeing fabric. And what I was doing with these is printing a mordant and then putting them in an immersion dye. The kind of transformation that you get from this process is really satisfying to see. A textile can go into the dye bath and be, have nothing on it. It can be completely white. And then it emerges really transformed. It's a really, really stunning process. I also would encourage you in general, this is how I work, is to trust what you're interested in, even if you don't necessarily know what it's going to lead to. While I was there, something that kind of like took away a little bit of my time from working on making these textiles that I was then going to be sewing with, was working on doing some mold making for aluminum casting and pewter casting. And I thought that it made a lot of sense for my work after getting into it more. I'm so interested in objects. Why not then like fabricate my own objects that are kind of a direct correlation, but don't use that original thing, and shift it from being something that is soft and pliable to something very, very solid. It just has a different physicality. And the next piece that I'll show you is from a show that was at Northern Illinois University Art Museum. And this show was very much about mourning. We asked quite a few different artists to contribute to artwork that was part of a grief process for them personally or socially. And all of my experiences with using natural dye as this transformative material led me to kind of thinking about that and working on a piece that was strictly just the fabric, which was something that I, felt very strange about doing at that time. What does it mean to like then just have a fabric? There's not a found object sewn into it. I'm not like shifting anything with that. So what is that? What is, the kind of the process that I'm interested in here? I also, alongside this work, had a sound element that is hidden inside some of the fabric that's in these sets of bowls. In these bowls, we have various things that you would use in natural dye just to kind of give a sense of the physical experience of working with these as a meditative quality. So there is ground eggshells for calcium carbonate, as well as ferrous that's suspended in water, essentially creating rust water. Different dyed fabrics and indigo leaves, as well as logwood wood pieces. And the process of making these kind of potions is really something that really feeds me and that I very much enjoy. I think that it has definitely, kind of come to be a big part of my process. And this is another installation that I did with two other artists. We were all kind of thinking about fabric as this thing that can create an archive in some way. So Olivia Zubko, whose work that you're seeing in the front, is taking textiles that have been crocheted and then firing them in clay so that they, become a ceramic crocheted form. And Noah Kashiani is the other artist who I believe teaches here also, right? Anyway, and he has a variety of kind of like Halloween masks and things like that, things that are kind of like trash upon arrival, right? That he's chromed or covered in these kind of resinous materials, making them permanent. And I, again, was like, okay, let's think about these textiles as like, they are kind of like soft and malleable, but we're going to sew them into their folds. They're going to like hold that shape for a long time. And here's just another installation view of that. From here, I, kind of had a big shift. I was interested in doing something that engaged with not just a material, but maybe a space. And so for Terrain Biennial last year, around this time last year, I did an installation where I was sewing fabric around a fence of someone that was hosting me, which inevitably is like a very public, strange thing to do. People were very interested in it, though. And the thing that I didn't really necessarily realize until I was making it was that this kind of has the implication of a privacy fence that we're kind of like setting a boundary between public and private. And here's some more images of that, as well as me being a pincushion for while I'm sewing it. And so from there, I started to kind of like go back to the studio, think about how I could explore these ideas that were not necessarily in the same method of responding to this specific place. Like, how could I make something that relates to, this that could be in a gallery? And after noodling around in the studio a lot, making fabric kind of fences that are not filled with anything, I also sourced some window bars from my landlord, who's always been real advocate for making. Here's me making a chain link fence in the studio. This is a body of work that I'm still like very much getting to know. So I haven't included this specific series in the PowerPoint, but I will be showing a 8-foot by 15-foot version of this kind of chain link fence made out of fabric at Bridgeport Art Center in November. The name of the show is Thirst Trap, so if you're interested, you can check it out there. But I was also working with these window bars, and again, it kind of begs this question of the public and the private, and this kind of like facade of protection that we get from having these protective barriers. Just gonna kind of scroll through those. I also was constructing these kind of window-like pieces as well, which is something that I'm still kind of doing additionally. So these are kind of like more of a window frame that is being treated in a similar way, being sewn around as if the whole thing is the thing being encapsulated. And another set of window bars. So for me, I kind of need two things going at any given time. So working on the window bars, trying to make these like soft sculpture things has kind of been one part of my practice this last year. And then I've also been working on some smaller pieces that I'm going to show you as well. And these are all various tools that I have then hand sewn into hand-dyed textiles, and then made these archival boxes for. I have a background as a bookmaker, box maker. I teach a lot of classes in that. And so it did feel kind of natural that would eventually become something that was part of my art practice. So these are some surgical instruments that were my father's. He, again, he works for the government now. He doesn't necessarily do surgery anymore. So I asked him for some of his surgical tools. And after I called them tools, he said, actually, they're instruments. And I was really interested in that kind of class divide too, and like the kind of work that we're doing. So after getting some from him, I also wanted to kind of look at some of my tools that are maybe, abandoned or underutilized or broken, and make something with them. And, in my job as a, like someone that installs art at a gallery, for example. So I'll kind of click through a few of those. This one is a screwdriver. It's just like a little bent, but has been, not used in quite a long time. And this one's a tape measure that is stuck at that length. So it's kind of, needed to be folded in some way. And a French. And I've been working on like doing kind of an installation with all of these together. And again, kind of going back to the sewing machine, to the exploded fan, thinking about how all of these like broken parts maybe like come back together again in a different format. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. Figure you get to see another cat picture since you've sat through it all this long. And if you are interested in like seeing more of my work, reaching out, I have my website, my email, and my Instagram on there. So yeah, thanks y'all.
We have time for like 2 questions, maybe 3, depending on how long they are. Yes, right.
Like, did you learn how to sew like in your childhood? Like before, like did you start sewing before you started quilting as an art form?
Yes, yeah, I did. That's a great question. Like really practically speaking, my first studio was like in the back of my dad's veterinary office, it was just like go hang out back there. And they did give me, like embroidery floss and things to sew with. My mom also tried to teach me to sew with a sewing machine when I was pretty young and is not a great teacher. And so I got very frustrated, as like, as 7-year-olds are wont to do with like heavy machinery. And so my like act of rebellion was like, you know what, I'm just going to hand sew it. And so, and I'm no longer afraid of sewing machines, but it is, something that I got very, very used to doing. Yeah.
For the pieces that you had the hands in, it looked like it was dyed on the fabric, but then was it actually you sewing the hand shape? Going back to
Is it like one of the oval ones that you're thinking about?
tools or even before that?
It is. So the hands are printed onto the fabric, but there have been times where I like will also sew a pattern into it. And as you can kind of see with this one, like the abstract shape that's, kind of like drawn with thread. But it's your... Yes, yeah, exactly. And I don't think that I mentioned this. These hands, I started printing at the same time that I was doing the broken sewing machine installation. And all of these hands are taken directly from documentaries about sweatshop workers. So they're like sweatshop workers' hands working on various things, operating a sewing machine, navigating a button, like doing different hand tasks. Yeah.
What's like a relatively, like how long does it take you to finish a piece, especially like one of the bigger ones?
Oh my gosh, it really varies. I always think that I'm going to be able to do something faster than I am. And when it's like you consider the time of like drawing the thing and printing it, and I try not to think about it too much, but it is something that artists need to think about, right? Like how much labor are we actually putting into something? I really want to have a time card for each piece so I can like clock into it anytime that I'm kind of working on it, so that I get a sense of it. And because I have a few things in the fire kind of all the time, it's sometimes hard to keep track. But I would say a piece like this, the sewing part of it, probably takes me like 2 weeks, kind of like while also working on other stuff. And something like the like sewing machine installation would be, a month or so, maybe 2 months. But that's just the sewing part of it. Like that doesn't really account for like all of the printing that happens. And I kind of go in cycles, right? Where I'm printing a lot of fabric so that I have plenty of supply for when I'm ready and I know what the right thing is. Or sometimes like I'm like, oh, I need enough of this fabric to do this specific thing. So, it can kind of vary. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So if we don't see threads going over these 3D objects, does it mean they're attached with a translucent fabric over them?
Exactly. Yes. So frequently there's like a translucent fabric that is kind of over them. So, with this one, you can kind of see the transparent fabric, right? And it's being sewn down at either edge. Yeah. Or let's see if maybe like another one of the boxes kind of, I think, illustrates that a little bit too. With this one, there's like printing on the transparent fabric that's over it, right? So you can kind of see that additionally. But yeah, this one, the transparent fabric isn't printed on, so it's sewn around on either side though. Yeah. People usually ask if they're glued, and there's no glue involved. But yeah.
All right, thank you. Let's give Millicent a clap again.